Awesome. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Generative AI and I. So, generative AI has been compared to this iPhone moment, one that has disrupted the way in which we communicate, bringing historical tech change and the advent of new apps and business models. Now, this isn't really a space where there are experts, and everyone is on their own learning journey. And the ones who stay ahead are the ones that are curious. So, in this new podcast, we will talk to the builders, the doers, and the leaders with one goal to help you understand and stay ahead in this new machine generated creative new world. Please note all the opinions expressed here are personal. So, with that, today we have someone with us who's in the forefront of building trusted generative AI for healthcare, pivoting from a long career in tech across Asia and corporate America to eventually being a 2x founder, an investor, and currently the CEO of Autonomize AI. His mission is straightforward. The explosion of healthcare data over the past decade hasn't really translated into improved patient outcomes, personalized medicine, or affordable care. And all of this is because of this missing link, making all of that information accessible and computable for humans and algorithms to make decisions. He's a person who's extremely passionate about healthcare and how tech can bring in good. And he and his team are keen to autonomize healthcare. So good to have you here, Ganesh. Thank you for being here.
No, thanks for inviting me, and it's great to be in Bangalore. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you're in the city as well this week. So, to kind of kick off, let's maybe start a bit about understand your interest in the space, Ganesh. I know you've been playing multiple roles, right? You've been in the product space, the VC space, the AI space, and now again with the Gen AI and healthcare. So, tell us a bit about your background and your interest in the space.
Yeah, no. So look, I mean, AI, I fundamentally believe is probably and most possibly the most important and critical piece of inventions of humankind, right?
Hmm.
And I know there's been a lot of comparisons to fire and electricity and so forth, right? But I think the big
Yeah,
opportunity is like, look, the simple the simple thought process that I have on this is, look, the explosion of data around the world has completely exceeded our human abilities to read, write, I mean, understand, perceive, make decisions
yeah,
on with all that data. So we live in this myopic, mental world where there's a lot more data. Now, you can always argue whether all that data is needed to, I mean, are we just going to get confused with all that data? But, generally more
mm,
data leads to better decisions, right?
mm,
So you need the assistance of powerful, technology-led systems like AI
hmm,
to make
hmm,
those decisions, make sense out of the world,
hmm,
right? So,
hmm,
I think the opportunity to elevate the human experience is why
hmm,
this is more impactful. Now, generative AI, I'll give you a couple of thoughts on how I'm thinking about it. So, generative AI
hmm,
as a topic, just became
hmm.
hot because of like
Yeah.
ChatGPT and all of last year, all the GPT launches last year. I
Mm,
think a couple of things, right? This has been coming for
mm,
70 plus years, right? This didn't
mm.
happen overnight.
Yeah.
Even OpenAI, Sam Altman will tell you, like, yeah, we launched it in December, but that took us
Yeah.
since 2014 to get to that point, right? So I think the big thing that happened was the expectation gap of people thought where AI was versus
Mm,
when they actually realized that this is where AI is today. They were just
mm,
blown away, and that just opened up and captured the imagination of people to try different things. So what really
mm,
happened with this wave of generative AI and how it just exploded is, one, people didn't expect AI to be what it was. I mean, you and I have been in AI for a while, so we kind of knew that you can detect objects in an image
mm,
faster and better than humans can. You can write text and read text better than humans can. But then when you bridge that gap of, like, the average person didn't know that. So we had one of those, dinner table moments wherein you now have this amazingly capable things, and creation unlocked it, right? Because you're now touching
yeah.
on something that is completely humankind.
Yeah.
People
Yeah.
think creativity is very innately just human. So we
Yeah.
write, we create art, we do, dialogue and speak, and
Mm,
all of a sudden you
yeah.
had AI forming all of that. So it
Mm,
was kind of like a
mm,
wake up call. So, and then the last thing I would say on generative AI, also the fact that the human machine interaction, that a simple
Mm.
prompt based interfacing to use human
Yeah.
language to interact with algorithms
Mhm.
really opened up the imagination of people engaging in the space. So, I mean,
Mm.
all of these reasons are why I'm like, I would say, boom, this is the
Yeah.
explosion. This is the explosion all of us have been waiting for. So,
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
space is pretty fascinating. But one last two things I would say is one, we're still very, very, very early in the space.
Yeah.
And it's going to be an amazing future as we go through it. Second,
Yeah.
the fundamental thesis on AI is a bag of tools for a bag of problems doesn't change, right? I mean,
Yeah.
now people will try to put generative AI on everything, and it's probably, if you're doing medical record
Yeah.
review and trying to identify diseases, a language model is
Mm.
probably the most terrible idea to use on that one, right? A large language
Mm.
model. You may just require an NLP model that does named entity recognition and be a lot more
Mm.
accurate, a lot more perfect. So, yeah, it's
Yeah.
fascinating space, and it's a great time to be here.
Um, no, I love that. And I probably want to unpack that a bit for our audience, right? I think all of the stuff you mentioned, like two or three themes, it's very close to the mental model I have as well, Ganesh, right? I think first, you spoke about why there's such an explosion. Suddenly, everyone is interested in this. And I was in a panel, and someone from Microsoft mentioned this, right? They said, now we have put a UI in front of AI, and suddenly there's this explosion because now everyone can see
Right.
the benefit of it, right? And I thought that was very thematic. You also
Very
spoke
true.
about how now it's moving into the generative space, right? Like all of the traditional AI has been very discriminative, and now we have moved into generative, which is historically been considered the human bastion, right? So you spoke
Domain.
about why. Yeah, exactly, and therefore the human language is probably what is another thing which is driving the interest in the space. And finally, you also called out very rightly so, right? You're starting with the data, not just the hype around AI, but because we have so much of data, and it is required for us to have tech-enabled tools for us to be able to interpret that. And I think the
Yeah.
other point, which I do want to stress, right? I talk to a lot of startups, and there's sometimes I feel like there's this hammer in search of a nail kind of thing where you're saying, oh, I want to do this. And then you're trying to find problems versus what is that problem you're desperately trying to solve for? And then, so the problem first and the tech second. So, calling
Right.
out like it's a bag of tools at the end of the day and figuring out what is the problem and then picking up the tool according to that versus, the other way around. So, very relevant
Yeah.
points on that front.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I think the other part is like one thing I would say is like the one of the downstream effects of this is like, and I like that comment from the Microsoft person who mentioned you
Mm,
put an UI in front of AI, right? You put in a human
yeah.
machine interaction
Yeah.
paradigm. You changed it because you now use
Yeah.
human language to do it.
Correct. Yeah.
A downstream impact of that is most likely English is probably going to become the most popular programming language. It's not going to be JavaScript anymore. It's not going to be Python
Mm,
anymore. It's
yeah.
going to be
Yeah.
English because you can have these intelligent systems that you can command and direct and provide input and instruct to do things that are really
Mm,
intelligent, really powerful, and you just
yeah.
need to know you can speak in English, right? So
Right.
I think it's fascinating. And now that you have all
Yeah.
these wrappers, you can even do that in other
Yeah.
languages that can then be turned into
That's true.
prompts. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
rich.
and I
Yeah.
think that's exactly where I was going, right? Yeah, but you're right. First, it's moved from being a JavaScript to more of a natural language, which in itself is a huge jump. But then again, taking it further, like to folks who do I need to be proficient in the language to be able to be a good prompt engineer? Maybe not so much, right? I think going ahead, like you said, it could be multimodal, right? Making it available to like
Exactly.
the farmers who can use this. So absolutely. So again, kind of extending that argument a bit, right? Thinking about like the stack, the Gen AI stack itself, from compute, the infra space, and the LLM space, and then looking at it, the top layer in terms of the application. So you have all of these different levels, and then there are few players who are across, right, like the verticalized players, and then there are some who are at the top. So each one of them comes with their own pros and cons. One of the things I often wonder about is how does it fare? How do you think it'll fare between the incumbents who probably stack rank across, like OpenAI, or folks who play at the compute layer, versus the new players who are entering the market who may be more at the top? right? Application and probably slightly
Yeah,
into the fine tuning of the LLMs. So how do you see that? How do you see that dynamic playing out between the two?
yeah. So that's a great question. In fact, there's a lot to unpack in that question, right? But
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
start with the what doesn't change premise, right? What
Hmm.
doesn't change is back to what I said earlier, which is bag of tools for a bag of
Yeah.
problems, right? As long as it doesn't matter if you're an incumbent, it doesn't matter if you're an early stage startup, it doesn't matter
Mm,
you're a vertically optimized player in a particular thing. As long as you're razor focused on solving a customer problem with the best
mm,
available tools at your disposal that can solve that
mm,
problem better than anything, you'll be
mm,
fine. You'll be totally fine.
mm,
Just remaining maniacally focused on that is what we have done
mm,
at Autonomize, right? I
mm,
mean,
mm,
well, obviously, you want to ride a little bit of the hype that everybody, when they start searching for generative AI in
mm,
healthcare, well,
mm,
they'll find
mm,
Autonomize, right? Because
mm,
we're doing something there. But that's not the end all, right? That's not all we're all
mm,
about, right? So I'll give you an example of that problem using right tools for right problems, like of
mhm,
what we do
mhm.
specifically in healthcare.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
then I will give you the broader stack view
Yeah.
of the market, right? So an
Mm,
example of
mm,
the problem. So we do a lot of work with healthcare insurance companies and pharma
mm,
companies and life sciences, even some large hospital systems, on
mhm,
helping them review multimodal medical charts at a very granular
mm.
fashion. So if you have,
Okay.
like a patient who's an oncology patient and you're looking to review medical history to see if they're eligible for a particular treatment or an
Mm,
experimental treatment like a clinical trial, you're having to review 1,000 pages of unorganized, disorganized documentation, which includes
mm,
doctor's summaries, discharge summaries, doctor's notes, progress notes, lab reports, pathology
mm,
reports, cytology reports.
mm,
I mean, it's
mm,
just a humongous mess, right? And what
mm,
happens within the industry is they actually someone prints it out or puts a secure
mm,
PDF viewer, reviews page
mm,
by page, maintains what they're looking and viewing this and stuff like that. And it is sad. It's a really sad state of affair. What we did was actually look, how do I turn that into an easier way to review? So what we used to do before generative AI became a huge hype, and we already had
mm,
this in a different way, but generative AI accelerated a lot of that. Is we used to
mhm,
actually then apply this natural language processing techniques on it to identify drugs, diseases, dosages,
mm,
medications, procedures, past treatment procedures, social determinants of health, all of that stuff, extract from this unorganized thing, resolve and link it around the patient, and provide a very 360 longitudinal view of the patient to make those decisions, right? What changed with the expectation with ChatGPT and generative AI is that now you can give a better experience to that thing. So we added
mm,
talk to the document, talk to that PDF, 2,000-page PDF, ask the questions you want about that patient in that
mm.
context of that document, not like it being,
Yeah.
sitting in the system.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just adding a small generative component to
Right.
generate the QA. And and the search is now, traditional search is dead. We used to do neural search with information retrieval where you can search this hundreds of millions of pages of unorganized
Hmm.
documentation for specific questions and used to give
Right.
the answer in an extracted fashion, right? Just like a Google
Right.
search would say, hey, this is what I found on the document.
Mm, mm,
Now
mm,
with
mm, mm.
generative AI, instead of giving an answer in an extracted
Yeah.
fashion, we
Yeah.
will
Yeah. Yeah.
generate a human readable response that makes the
Yes.
experience a lot more easier. What we saw
Right.
was our clinicians who were like your doctors, nurses, and stuff who would use these platforms or researchers were earlier having to go search and do and look. Now they can
Right.
just simply go ask a question, they get the answer, right?
Right.
Blew
Yeah.
up
Yeah.
the actual user base. So
Right.
an example,
Yeah.
focus on the problem. It's a tool that you can use to go do it. Your
Yeah. No,
question
I
on the
love
stack.
how.
Yeah, go
Yeah. Yeah.
ahead.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So your question, I was going to go away, but
Yeah.
you finish your question, follow up, and I'll go into the
Yes.
question about the stack in the
No,
industry.
I was just saying I love how all of use case you focus more on like what's a problem we are solving and then kind of bringing in tech in terms of how does it help us to get there, right? And it's not like you're force fitting it. Even the search, exactly. You're providing them with the solution, which probably because I was just thinking about how much of time do doctors spend, right? Like they have to make decisions and they have to do that in seconds. And personally, also, Ganesh, this is something which I feel so strongly about because my dad had this. one of the metrics off, which was way back in 2002, which he didn't realize until 2012. When we went back to his reports, we figured out that was there, and they just completely missed it, right? So I was just thinking about how life saving it could have been if that was captured and flagged as an
No.
anomaly ahead of time, right? So I feel so strongly about that use case in
The,
itself. So
it,
sorry, yeah,
No, no, no. You're that. This is. I have so many stories of that. This kind of
yeah,
things. I have a,
yeah,
not to bore you, but like I have a friend of mine
yeah.
who lifts weights 5 times a week, runs about 8 miles a
Mm,
week, or like 18 miles a week. His wife
mm,
is a doctor, eats healthy, vegan, vegetarian,
mm,
and
mm,
he had a 90 set. And all his numbers were okay, and then one fine day he felt chest pain. He went in, he had a 95%
mm.
blockage in one of the arteries, and they had to put a
Wow.
stent in right at that evaluation thing, right? And then you kind of
Um,
find out what happened there. Well, what happened was
mm,
he was regular with his checkups. His
mm,
triglycerides and cholesterol levels were just a little off, but
mm.
progressively off by a little bit more over the last seven
Oh,
years, right?
right. Wow.
Since it didn't hit the marker, the guy with the doctor, the physician, and bless his heart, is probably a really good physician, primary care
Yeah.
physician. But they were like, "Oh, just have some nuts and have some avocado, you'll be fine,"
Right.
right? Because
Right.
that's
Right.
the
Right. Right.
they didn't bother to check, and they don't have the tools at their disposal to look at
Right.
history. If you really
Yeah.
look
Yeah.
at the healthcare system around the world, we are dependent on the patient reporting how they feel.
Exactly.
That's it,
Exactly. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. No,
And you have all
absolutely.
the data about their past history, all the lab reports, all of that stuff, which is not easily accessible to make those decisions. So I
Mm,
100% agree with you. I think
yeah.
that's the big
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah.
Now, shifting
Like,
gears, talking about the stack in the market for
mm,
generative AI, right?
mm,
So one thing
mm.
you have to understand is not every problem can be solved using generative AI, right?
Yeah.
The reason
Yeah.
everybody talks about this being a huge unlock is the fact that automation earlier were restricted to just blue collar work, which was like robotics, building
Mm,
things from A to B.
correct. Yeah.
Creative work could not have been automated.
Yeah.
And the GDP of the world, most of I mean, it's still a lot of manufacturing, but healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
$9 trillion healthcare industry and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. It's knowledge
Mm-hmm.
work. So knowledge that now you have the ability to automate knowledge work, which is creation,
Mm,
which is writing content, and it increases efficiency, the whole nine yards. So that's why everybody's really
mm,
excited, which is great, right?
mm,
I think there's a
mm,
huge opportunity. How I see the stack evolving is like we're very, very, very early, right? If you've
mm,
been
mm,
actually,
mm,
watching, it's keeping up with all the things that's happening in Gen AI is a full-time job in itself
mm.
today, right? But
It is.
3 days ago,
Yeah.
the Falcon LLM was launched by the
Mm,
institute in Abu Dhabi, right? So they
mm-hmm.
open source the weights, they open source the training data sets for everything. It's fascinating. It takes,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, orders of magnitude less training and compute power for inferencing, and outperforms some of the GPT models, GPT 3.5 and stuff like
Mm,
that. Fascinating
mm,
thing, right? So it opens up
mm-hmm.
this. There's all these things coming up. So here's the way I view the stack today, right?
Mm,
Infrastructure, I think, if you believe in Moore's law, the extension of Moore's law, it's going to continue to get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, right? People complain about
mm-hmm.
training LLMs today. I can
Mm,
guarantee you a year from now, that'll be like training
mm-hmm.
an NLP model on a couple of GPUs, right? It's not going to be that
Mm,
hard.
mm,
We'll figure that out.
mm. Yeah.
And the people best positioned to solve that are obviously folks who work in that space, and their hardware companies
Yeah.
are going to, NVIDIA became a $1 trillion company. They're going to continue to do that.
Mm,
There is
mm,
opportunities for incumbents, right? Because when you
mm,
look at specialized applications, edge devices, and you want to do inferencing with a
mm,
generative model on a device at the edge, I mean, you need to actually
mm-hmm.
really optimize for power and performance and so forth, right? It's a lot of
Mm,
opportunity. The stack above is the foundation models, which is your LLMs, your
mm,
GPT models, your Allure
mm-hmm.
based models and stuff. There is a lot
Mm-hmm.
of folks who've gotten a head start, which
Mm,
is including OpenAI, for example,
mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
um, Eluthier, and what's all the other guys, right? Allen Institute's Jurassic or the Llama model. So I fundamentally believe that layer of LLMs is going to get commoditized. And however hard you try with being
Mm,
another OpenAI and competing with another OpenAI, you're gonna it's gonna be like a building block. It's a foundation model, and it's what it is. It's a foundation model. It just gives you a better starting point than having to train your own model from scratch, right?
mm,
So that
mm-hmm.
layer,
Mm-hmm.
anybody trying to build a new, unless they have very unique and stuff there, it's going to be hard to compete and win in that space, right? It
Yeah.
requires a lot of resources too, because today,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
today's dollars, it takes a lot of money to train.
Yeah.
That said, now if you have that foundation model and you have access to proprietary data or
Exactly.
knowledge or both,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
It's a very, very powerful combination, right? Because
Yeah.
you now have the tools, right? Now you have the
Yeah.
tools, you have a foundation model, and you know
Yeah.
exactly what it is. I mean, 99% of all open AI based tooling out there today, and I'm probably off by a couple of percentage points, but it's still very high, is non fine tuned use case. It's just out of the
Mm.
box. And
Mm.
if you
Yeah.
imagine for me an XY axis, right? Imagine a 2 by 2 diagram, an XY
Mm-hmm.
axis. The X axis is POC to production, right? That
Mm-hmm.
spectrum of going from concepts to production. And the Y axis
Mm-hmm.
is, generic, out of the box kind of capabilities to bespoke, specialized capabilities on the top, right?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
99% of everything what everybody's doing is out of the box AI, bottom left hand.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
90% of all enterprise use cases is top right hand, right?
Yeah.
Top right
Yeah.
spectrum. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
you're gonna have to do the data, the access, and
Yeah.
so forth. So that's it. I think there's a couple of interesting areas. So that's kind of generally the view on it. So then the question is, if you have access to proprietary data and have knowledge about a particular
Yeah.
domain, a vertical, a use case, whatever, how can you package that and drive distribution to more customers, more
Mm.
people to make
Mm.
to make an impact, right? That's where the value capture is going to happen initially. So
Mm.
if you
Mm.
see how the market has played out already, things like Jasper AI and folks who are just or copy AI deliver an
Mm-hmm.
application with some proprietary data and create a very easy distribution path to get to more and more users. Boom, they just blew up, became billions of dollars of companies, and I think they have the user moat to actually go and grow and build that thing. But I think even
Mm-hmm.
that whole thing about there's not a lot of um, competitive advantage other than the data and the knowledge that you have, and the distribution is going
Mm-hmm.
to be the big thing. But over time, there's a
Mm.
couple of other areas that's going to emerge, right? An area that we are
Okay.
heavily focused on is, if in healthcare we own those application interfacing, we have the intelligence to provide a particular use case in the most effective, impactful fashion can be delivered by
Mm.
Autonomized healthcare customers. Now, the next step on that is the customers are going to ask me saying, I want to use OpenAI service from Azure because Microsoft told me I should do that. Well, today that's the best performing thing for doing a generative QA or summarization. In a few months from now, it's probably the Falcon open source model or a Llama or an Alpaca model from Meta or Stanford that'll actually be better performing if you fine tune it for a particular thing.
Mm.
Well, I don't want to rewrite my application to go do that,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So this whole
Mm.
world of actually saying, can I provide a common interfacing to all my users and applications?
Mm.
Things like projects like the open source project like LangChain. It's very interesting for us because I think that kind of signifies what the future is going to be, right? And
Mm.
our mission at Autonomizing, for example, for healthcare, at least
Mm-hmm.
initially, is about we
Mm-hmm.
want to help autonomize these entire processes, not just automate it, but autonomize, create autonomous processes, right? So what we are always focused on is building the building blocks that if I'm
Mm-hmm.
actually a healthcare insurance company and I'm doing prior authorization of incoming claims or claim requests to say this
Mm-hmm.
patient, do they have the right medical history? Is there a medical necessity? Can I make those determinations and stuff? Each of that is individual micro processes, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have actually have
Mm-hmm.
your task to do it. Well, the ultimate
Mm-hmm.
world to autonomize is actually when you get a request from an application or a user, you pick the right subtask in the process, the right model to actually do an inference, pull all that results together, deliver a
Mm-hmm.
completely autonomous experience for that
Mm-hmm.
request or that process. That's where we
Mm-hmm.
want to move this thing. And it's not about just automating to the nth degree. Healthcare is more care than health. So it's all about people, right? But it's like imagine the doctor today has to
Mm-hmm.
spend in the US 60% of a physician, 60% of physician's time is spent on clinical documentation. 60%.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm.
call it
Wow.
the TV time, right? So after you finish a day of, because you're also required through compliance to actually document everything.
Okay.
The patient, the doctors see patients, specialists see patients all through like at 7 until 7 p.m. in the night. They go back home, have dinner, pick up their laptop, and they transcribe. They actually write down notes for each of those patients from
Wow.
memory, usually from notes. Happens all the time. This is like the de facto standard in the US. I'm sure, and also some other
Wow.
modern countries, right? Look at all that time that they're actually wasting and not really being efficient. So there's all these opportunities there, right? So I think my view is to come back to the generative AI landscape and stuff. There's a lot of opportunity across the stack just because we're early.
Hmm.
Infrastructure layer, the LLM layer, the fine tuning, and this thing. And there's a lot of, they say there's a gold rush for generative AI right now, right?
Yeah.
And you remember what
Right.
they say back in the 19, whatever the years was for the gold rush. When there's a gold
Build
rush, don't be
shovels.
mines, right? Build shovels and pickets, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's the way to solve it. I mean, if you're a technologist, that's your best way to solve it. If you
Yeah.
understand your customer really well, you go and figure out how do you deliver value the best way using all the tools you have. And that's the way you win
Mm.
in this market. And whoever is the winner today is most likely not going to be the winner. We're going to see this in fast forward, like we watch in old videos, right? We're going to see this in
Yeah.
fast forward, like 2x speed or 100x speed, how the market evolves. And it's already happening right
Yeah.
now. Yeah, I think that's the way
Yeah.
you think. That's the way
Yeah.
I think of
No, that's honestly that's awesome, Ganesh. Right? I loved your interpretation across the stack. So, a lot of things. I'm kind of summarizing right from this. First of all, I remember reading. Maybe this is from a VC where they spoke about how B2B versus B2C look at generative AI very differently. Because, like you rightly called out, right? B2C, if I'm talking to a celebrity, a dead celebrity, I'm okay, right? Accuracy is not so important. What would Steve Jobs say, for example, right? That's okay. The Slack is still okay. Versus a B2B where accuracy is primary importance, right? Like I can probably have code generated, but I still need a human in the loop to kind of validate it. So it talks about the fact you called out, right? That it's on the top half of the top right of the quadrant. All enterprise use cases end up over there. And therefore, what probably differentiates is the proprietary data and the human context in the loop in itself, right? And those who are building for that probably build defensible businesses. I quite like that.
yeah.
Something else I'm kind of taking away from this conversation is what you called out, right? Like right now, yes, OpenAI probably has better capabilities, so that's what they're using. But how do we orchestrate for switching between these applications seamlessly tomorrow if there's something else which is coming new? I think that's another quite important factor to consider. And then also your
Yeah,
mission for
one
Autonomize, right?
clarity.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, one point to clarify on that thing, right? I mean, you may very well be in a world where you don't have to worry about that switching, right? I
Yeah.
mean, like, think
Yeah.
about there are companies who took AWS as their de facto standard for building applications on the cloud.
Right.
They're not
Yeah.
bothered by the fact that Google has better vision service or
Yeah.
something else. They're like, yeah, you know what? It's good enough for me. I'm going to go, I get everything I want. And that play is going
Yeah.
to happen too, right? Same thing might
Yeah.
happen. Like, people are going to bet enough applications are going to be in open AI that people are like,
Mhm.
I'm not going to switch out just because I get 2% accuracy. But your earlier point on things like if you're focused on the customer problems and
Yeah.
you need to actually pick the right tools for the right problems, then
Yeah.
you need that optionality to go solve like what's the
Yeah.
right model for this thing. Sorry. Yeah.
You could have the
Just want to clarify.
flexibility, of course. Yeah, thanks for that. Right, if you need to, and you would potentially have the flexibility, and it's similar to like the cloud play, right? Like that's how we kind of
Yeah.
evolved in the cloud era as well.
Yeah.
And also the point around modularizing, which is what it sounded like, right? Like you're modularizing these different blocks in Autonomize so that you can pick and choose these subtasks based on the use case itself which you have available. And I think that's a very smart
Or a
way to kind of build
large,
out.
yeah, or a
Yeah,
large language model can pick and
yeah,
choose for you. AI
mm,
can pick and choose those building blocks to build the application for you too, right? Today,
yeah,
everybody wants
yeah,
to pick and choose, but eventually you'll get comfortable enough to let the AI do that build work for you as well. So, or I think, yeah, that's, I think the future is super bright, in terms of like
yeah.
this market and what this can actually do. And so forth.
Yeah, yeah. I like your positive outlook towards it. I'm a very optimistic person as well. Yes, I think it's like they say, right, the most exciting times or the most fearful of times. But it definitely is, as you say, moving at 2x speed. And we all could have a role to play in this. So we spoke a lot
Yeah.
about the tech stack and how do you build value across this. Let's talk a bit about healthcare itself, right? And you did allude to this, but tell me a bit more about how do you see healthcare as a domain being uh, transformed by Gen AI? Again, you spoke about specific use cases, but where do you see opportunities? Where do you see forerunners in the space?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, healthcare is a $9 trillion industry globally, right, or more.
Mm,
It's like
mhm,
it's one of, after defense probably and manufacturing is probably the largest industry. We produce more than
mhm.
one third of all the data in the world today, right,
Wow. Mhm,
on a yearly and on a daily basis. It
mhm,
also is the industry with the most amount of knowledge workers, right? Think
mm.
about it.
Yeah.
Researchers, doctors, physicians, nurses.
Mm,
It's largely a knowledge work oriented
mhm,
industry. So at least theoretically, it's the fact that, I mean, it probably has the most to gain with generative AI
mm, mm,
to improve experiences, right? So
mhm,
like that, with that basis in mind, I think the big opportunity is like we think about this from, you know, everybody, the incentives are going to be aligned much faster than we think. Doctors are using
mm,
chat gpt right now. They shouldn't be, but they're
mhm,
using it, right? A lot of them shouldn't be because they're putting sensitive data out there, but all that thing's going to change and evolve. So the whole problem of, hey, getting adoption is going to be solved just because of the noise and
mm.
the wanting, because every other part of your life is going to be touched by generative
Yeah.
AI. So if you're a physician or
Yeah.
doctor, like, I'm wasting time having to type down a 100-word document when I can just speak it and it can actually automatically take the context and pull it together. Right? So
Mm,
I think we're going to start seeing that. I do see, though, like I would say, it's going to be a harder industry because to just back to you, I think you mentioned it, right? It's great, or we talked about this earlier. If you're looking for the spectrum of correctness versus experience, right? So we're optimizing for an experience of,
mm,
like you want to have a human-like chatbot that talks like a human, that understands the context and give you an answer.
mm,
Generative AI is a
mm,
great opportunity, right? If you
mhm,
want to actually go, and there's enough papers already being published on this, if you want to go and take a medical note and
mm,
understand the progression of symptoms towards a disease thing, you run it
mm,
on chat gpt or the gpt-3 or 4 models, your accuracy and f1 score is anywhere from 30 to 40%,
mm,
right, on getting it right. And
mm.
for those problems, generative AI is a terrible idea, right? Or GPT models are a
Yeah.
terrible idea. What we need
Mm,
is, my engineers call it, and we call, I mean, after everybody called everything LLMs, we also call our clinical models like, hey, it's just a library of LLMs. And they're like, no,
mm,
correct. They corrected me saying it's not an LLM, it's an SLM. It's a small language model
mm,
that does
mm, mm,
one thing really, really well.
mm,
So
mm,
I think, the healthcare as an industry, you can't whitewash it with, generative AI, but you can
mm,
actually just look across the spectrum and say, what are the interaction points? What are the areas? What
mm,
are the functions, subdomains that you can actually go and fix and solve using AI in general? And the other good thing that happened is, I do believe fundamentally, and I'm going to make this up, but 80% of all the work that anybody will do with AI in the world is not going to be generative in nature.
GenAI. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's not
And
going
it
to
doesn't
generate.
need to be, right? I don't
It
think
doesn't
it
need to
needs
be.
to
But
be.
the fact that everybody understands and is excited about generative AI will make sure that they will do that
Yeah,
80% of the
they
work.
use the
Otherwise,
other.
they will
Yeah,
either,
probably. Absolutely. I think it's kind of bringing
right?
it out of AI winter because of the interest over there. No, I hear you on that one. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. So I think
yeah.
healthcare has got, if you really think about it, start from the scratch, start from the beginning.
Mm-hmm,
Everything from building and developing medicines and therapies for human beings and animals,
mm-hmm,
whatever, from a drug
mm-hmm,
development perspective. If you
mm-hmm,
really think about how drugs are developed today,
mm-hmm,
the early stage of discovery, molecular discovery or drug discovery, is a hit
mm,
or a miss. You just,
mm,
almost like Einstein, they do thought experiments on what could happen and then go
yeah.
try to experiment on mice and, goats and other animals and so forth. And then, find a potential candidate, go through a 15-year process of getting it through clinical trials and get it out to market.
Mm,
The opportunity is like, you have data. So can you
mm-hmm,
model this? The initial part of finding out what, molecular combinations will have what impact on gene is a math problem, right? It's a
mm,
you can simulate this whole environment in a synthetic. You can simulate synthetic biology and generate
mm,
these, different structures and protein structures and stuff, and try that particular thing. Great
mm,
opportunity for generative AI in biology, right? Early drug
mm,
discovery.
mm,
You
mm,
go into
mm,
this
mm,
front end of the spectrum across the entire drug development process, like clinical trials,
mm,
post-launch and stuff for pharma, even extending all the way to care management, case management. Patient experience around the world in healthcare is just terrible, awful,
mm,
right? So
mhm,
huge opportunity to, like, when you have, like, you call up for appointments, you call up for setting up your scheduling your labs and stuff like that. It's just terrible experience, right?
mm,
Small problems you can solve with generative AI, scheduling and
mm,
all the kinds of
mm.
peripheral. You're not making decisions using generative
Yeah.
AI, but you're actually
Mm,
helping engage the patient better. So another huge opportunity.
mm,
Then
mm,
you go into the spectrum of things like, when you have knowledge work happening around clinicians or researchers writing documentation or research
mm,
grants,
mm,
brainstorming for different huge opportunity for generative AI.
mm,
Further down the
mm,
spectrum, care management, case management, and I'm not even talking about, like, things like clinical trials, identifying the needles in
mm,
the haystack, the patients that have
mm,
best chance of getting the right results and response for a treatment, identifying them,
mm,
reviewing medical history, making sure you're, packaging your submission for FDA, which is a,
mm,
really complicated knowledge process, could be automated.
mm,
Now, there's a
mm,
lot of things you got to make in the right trust, the human in the loop, all of
mm,
that stuff to go make all
mm,
this happen. And then
mm,
on the care management, case management, the health care side, the delivery, care delivery,
mm,
and management, there's so much opportunity. Like, we're working with a large healthcare provider. They have these, they do this thing called, like, when you're processing a claim, you go to edit and change the claims based on different
mm,
rules. And these
mm,
rules are updated very constantly, by the Center for Medical Services, CMS, and so forth.
mm,
Today it's done very manually. People read what changed, and then they match it to what already they have, and then they
mm,
merge it, change the rule, or update it and stuff. We've automated the entire process using generative AI. Something
mm,
changes, it triggers, you read that, you understand it, do some comprehension, match it, do a similarity search, pull up the right rules that may have been impacted,
mm,
recommend change for the user and say, hey, we found this new CMS guidance. It changes this
mm,
particular thing. And
mm,
we recommend this change to the rule. And the user
mm.
has to just say approve or decline, and
Yeah,
here's why. And you get the
yeah,
reinforcement feedback. And yeah, you didn't get that right.
right.
Or you got that right, you push it. Now the whole process of care delivery became a lot more. Somebody's not waiting for 3 months to get paid on a claim, right? Which can
Right,
happen.
right, right, right.
So much
Mm,
opportunity across the entire spectrum. And then lastly, I would
yeah.
say, right, if you really think about people with chronic conditions or,
Mm,
terminal illness like cancer and so forth,
mm, mm,
getting educated on your options, what the challenges are, understanding your data a lot, just that
mm.
translation. The data today is not contextualized for consumption by the patient
Yeah,
or the
yeah,
caregiver.
yeah. Mm,
Another huge opportunity. I mean, imagine
yeah,
if you can, at some
yeah.
point we'll launch this consumer app on Autonomizing's
Mm,
platform, wherein,
mhm,
you just free for consumers. You want to just
mm,
aggregate all your records, put it in there, and ask questions about it. We can do that
mm.
today.
Yeah,
Obviously, we
yeah,
don't
yeah,
want to hold that data, so we got to innovate all
yeah,
around, like, the security, the privacy, all of that kind of stuff that we want to do.
yeah,
But
yeah.
wouldn't it be amazing for, if you're a caregiver and
Right.
you're taking care of a
Yeah,
family member or friend who's got cancer, you know
yeah,
exactly what the
yeah,
options are, what the
yeah.
latest research says, and I mean, there's so much
Yeah.
opportunity. So I think
No,
the
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. No, Ganesh, I love the fact that you kind of went through that entire end-to-end stack, right? Talking about, I think you covered so many different things like drug discovery to front-end patient experience. You spoke about knowledge work, which can be replaced or automated, care management. I think you also spoke, the one which I feel again dearest to me against across all of that is providing people the context, translating it into language which makes sense to caregivers, right? Like again, I had a close one with very chronic condition, and I know the amount of angst and helplessness you feel with wanting to know more but don't know where to seek out that information because you're not really the expert there. I can
yeah,
absolutely understand the importance that could bring in, right? So very curious to understand like where does autonomize play across all of this? You spoke about like several areas. Where do you see
yeah.
autonomize niching?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So we have a couple of very key capabilities, right? One is
Mm-hmm.
we built a very you know still early but a comprehensive AI platform that is optimized
Mm-hmm.
for working with healthcare data types. So
Mm-hmm.
understanding, when somebody uploads a document, understanding personal identifying information, personal health information from it, PHI, redacting
Mm-hmm.
that, data
Mm-hmm.
management of actually how do you deal with sensitive data, all of that stuff is
Mm-hmm.
part of the core platform. Then we
Mm-hmm.
have a library of capabilities, large language models, small language models, machine learning models, and so forth that can be different tools for different jobs,
Mm-hmm.
if you will, that can be
Mm-hmm.
used to apply to specific that data that you're curating. So multimodal data
Mm-hmm.
ingest, doing the extraction from that data, and then enriching it. We have a very comprehensive backend on which uses graphs and graph neural networks and things like that. That actually, I'm giving you a technology thing. I'll come back up to what problems we solve with that. So
Mm-hmm.
we built that thing, and then with the generative AI toolkit, a set of tasks that you can apply on the same data type. Turning the
Mm-hmm.
data from unstructured to structured to embeddings that you can apply an LLM to.
Mm-hmm.
So that is our base capability and cross which that's the foundation in which everything is built. And we support, state of the art language models, our own language models. You want to use an open AI, put that API key, and you can use that in a secure environment,
Mm-hmm.
privacy and stuff like that. Right. So that's one
Mm-hmm.
side of it. Now, using this, the core capability that we have really become very good at over the
Mm-hmm.
last year and a half, only about a year and a half old, right,
Mm-hmm.
is understanding multimodal clinical data. So we have
Yeah.
all the different models that we need to understand a diagnostic report, a doctor's note, a
Mm-hmm.
discharge summary,
Mm-hmm.
a claims documentation, and
Mm-hmm.
then being able to stitch that together and resolve it around one patient or a set of patients or a
Mm-hmm.
population. So you can ask questions, you can get insights on risk adjustments, you can get insights on their
Mm-hmm.
eligibility for clinical trials, and then
Yeah.
delivering that experience with AI, right? So that is our core. I would say there's a foundational platform.
Fundamental.
That foundational
Yeah.
platform, we have this core capability. So we play in two distinct areas today. One
Okay.
for life sciences and pharmaceutical companies. We help them identify patients who match requirements for a clinical trial, and we help
Mm,
them recruit and retain those patients using AI. Right
mm,
now, again, we're not a
mm,
recruitment
mm.
platform. There are several recruitment companies, patient recruitment companies, and clinical research organizations that use our technology to power their workflows. So that's one.
Brilliant. Okay.
The other
Okay.
part of this is using the same ability to understand multimodal clinical data applied to care
Mm-hmm.
settings. So that is
Mm,
prior authorization for insurance, care and case management, population health management, and risk management for healthcare insurance companies, as well as the
mm.
large integrated healthcare providers. So these are the two areas
Mm.
that we play in. And again, I think the way you think about it is like we have a foundational technology infrastructure,
Yeah.
the platform. On that platform is this core capability around understanding and being able to make decisions for multimodal clinical data, which is
Mm.
packaged as multiple applications for different sub
Yeah.
industries, right?
Got it.
And our
Yeah. Yeah.
evolution
Got
from
it.
here is being able to build the tooling for other
Yeah.
innovators to build using our same platform other applications they want to do. Right? That's the
Okay.
evolution of where we're going from here.
Brilliant. Yeah. So sounds like the capability, the core capability you spoke about, right? Understanding patient data through a multimodal system provides you the fundamentals to host these two core applications, and then also provides you capabilities to build like a what sounds like a marketplace for others to build their own applications based on this data, right? Quite an
Yeah.
exciting space to be. You're like quite in the forefront of everything which is new. All right, so Ganesh, kind of switching tracks a bit before we close. All of this is hunky dory, right? It's very exciting. I personally think that tech can be a huge democratizing force, but I do want to take a moment to talk about the flip side, right? Especially in something as sensitive as healthcare. You spoke about data, drug discovery, for example, and I remember maybe in one of the podcasts there was this really nice analogy. This person spoke about I think he called it the Moloch barrier, if I remember it right. So he said this is the phenomenon that humanity has, not necessarily only to AI, but with any advent of anything new, like, for example, gene editing. So one
Mhm.
person is doing it. You spoke about incentives, right? So tying back to incentives and what drives us. we are not bad people, right? Everyone has the right intentions, but our incentives drive behavior, not intentions.
Yep.
So therefore,
Yep.
he spoke about how, like for example, someone or some country or some entity does gene editing, and then someone else has to do it even though they may not necessarily want to, just to keep up, right? So you're constantly digging deeper and deeper and deeper, and that continues to happen. And that could happen with AI as well if there are some bad actors in the fray. And especially with respect to healthcare, is that's something I think about a lot. So talk to me a bit more about that, right? Governance, responsible use of AI,
Yeah.
especially with respect to data in healthcare.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's very loaded too, right? I mean, there's so many different
Yeah,
tentacles on this thing, right? But
yeah.
I'll give you some of my core beliefs in here, and I think how
Mm-hmm,
we should think about it as well. And
mm-hmm,
we can go into a lot of detail. One is, you know, if you technology is a tool,
mm-hmm,
governing AI and sentience with AI and stuff, I think it's the complete distraction from what we are today and what we should be focused on, right?
mm-hmm,
So AGI being super close, and I'm not arguing against the pace at which we're going. And you project it out, you're going to get not sentient but really capable systems that are powerful tools, right?
mm-hmm,
Um, so then the governance and focus on this should be more on the actors using these tools, the
mm-hmm,
design of incentives to actually make sure that they are using it the right way for the right impact,
mm-hmm,
and having the consequences very clearly laid out, right? Nobody will
mm-hmm.
hack a U.S. government patient database knowingly, and because if they get caught, they're going for prison for life, right?
Mm,
Nobody would actually go and leak personal data in the European Union, because
mm,
GDPR will fine the company like billions of dollars to go take, and then put people criminally liable to actually go use that, right? So we have
mm,
figured out how to use, like, an automobile can be used as a death machine to go run and mow people down. People don't
mm,
use that every day to do that, right? An
mm,
aircraft can be used, just like 9/11, to go do it. So we put the structures in place to go and manage the irresponsible use or the unintended consequences of that. So we have history in how we deal with these kind of things. There's nothing new. I
mhm,
don't think it's anything. The only thing probably new is the rate of change is very high, and in the U.S.
mm.
government, we're still
Yeah.
fighting over that stupid debt ceiling. You want them to actually govern AI? I'm like, are you kidding me? So there's that thing, the knowledge gap and
Mm,
stuff like that. So
yeah.
all that aside, so when you keep
Mm,
all that aside, I think the way we should think about governing this thing is not the way we're thinking about it right now. I fundamentally believe that.
mhm,
And the way we're thinking about it right
mm.
now is like, do a pause of things where all these things happening for
Yeah.
the next 6 months,
Yeah.
or we should have all these governments getting together to actually put this thing together. I'm yet to meet a government employee or a lawmaker who understands AI. And you want them to put this. I mean, anyway. So the other thing that's happening is all of these open AI. Sam Altman was at the Senate hearing the other
Congress.
day.
Yeah.
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 So the incentives for an incumbent in the space is going to put
Mm,
heavy regulations that only they have the resources to meet.
mm.
It's naturally going to be this thing. So this is more social engineering than AI engineering, right?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
all about how do we really think about it. That said, I think there's a few things that we can do in healthcare and other industries. If you're actually looking at, so it is true that we're going to get on the explosion of misinformation campaigns and
Mm.
use of this technology to make people, the hive mind of the internet can actually make people, they made people
Right.
go up to the Capitol thinking they can, a defeated president in an
Right.
election can be reinstated because they showed up at a fucking Capitol. Sorry. But,
Mm,
it's just, so those kind of things, the
mm,
use of these powerful tools to change people's minds is a huge danger. We
mm,
have presidents, and how do you put the right structures in place to
mm,
dissuade that particular behavior? So that's one part
mm,
of it, the
mm.
governance, the rules, the things. But I think we've got to be really careful, because you cannot stifle innovation that's going to actually lead to.
Yeah.
I mean, all that
Yeah.
GDP we talked about, and the way we can get out of the gutter today in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
economy, the global economy, with all those things, is not by cutting costs and deficit, but it's by improving
Mm,
productivity. And we now have
mm,
this powerful tool of generative AI to go do that, right? So let's not screw that up.
mm,
So that's one.
mm,
Second thing is, if you're depending on the use of AI, these powerful systems for the industry or for the use case that you're doing, if you're using healthcare and if you're using personal
mm,
identifiable data, PHI data, put the right,
mm,
things in place. How do you make sure? Like we build things like a PHI tool, a personal health information redaction tool. You can use
mm,
OpenAI's GPT-3 or 4 API and not worry about if you use it through the Autonomize platform. You don't have to worry
mhm,
about sending your data into a
mm,
OpenAI cloud or an Azure cloud, right? We do that
mm,
scrubbing,
mhm,
keep it locally, we deploy that model in a very secure environment. So all these things. There are ways to solve this. The big thing
mm.
that's going to happen is the classic, the hallucination problem is real, right?
Yeah,
So if you use untrained models without the right context capture and context optimization engines and so
yeah,
forth, you can start directing, you can promote and propagate misinformation, malinformation,
mm,
hallucination, lead to
mm,
a lot of damage consequences.
mm,
And there are all technical ways to solve this. And so,
mm.
I mean, as I said, this can go into so many different tentacles.
Yeah,
We need
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah,
have, I do believe though that any kind of, let's have a national framework to solve this and stuff
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
Lawmakers
yeah.
should stick to what they know best, which is creating laws to create incentives and dissuade the bad behavior, not trying to govern AI. Like, there's this article on you should open source a model versus not. I do believe that the open source um, movement that we are seeing in generative AI is going to
Mm,
be a very key driver of good intent. Because if you
mm,
remember like open sourcing is generally great because it dissuades it gives access to powerful pieces for everybody. But then that's when your
mm,
incentives take over. But then now you
mm,
actually ensure that the capitalist forces are or the evil corporations or whoever now has all the
mm,
power and the data and the things to go do it. With open source, I
mm,
mean, you don't have to worry about that. Right? So open source is a very
mm,
critical in this whole thing. But I think
mm.
it's going to have to we'll have to look at a multi-dimensional way to solve this problem, right? You
Yeah,
have to have
yeah,
lots of
yeah,
regulations to dissuade and promote the right behavior. You
yeah,
have to
yeah.
have right technical tooling to actually go help people and innovators do the right things to meet those particular things. You need to
Mm,
have a really good, social re-engineering and re-education kind of a
mm,
spectrum because it's going to be true. A lot of people are going to be out of jobs because of generative AI.
yeah,
How do you
yeah,
reskill
yeah,
them? That social fabric re-engineering is another important
yeah,
aspect of it. And then,
yeah,
of course,
yeah,
I think you got to look at this as this multiple dimensions than just like one
yeah,
trick you need to go solve it,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, no, I absolutely get your point, and I agree as well that it's not like a straightforward, oh, put together the set of checklist of 10 items and then follow it and it's all going to be all right. It's not, right? It's a very nuanced problem. It takes the combination of things. I like the point around, incentives which can drive the right behaviors coming in from probably the governments. And also, the tech, as you called out, to have that incorporated. You also spoke about how individually each of these startups could play their part in making sure that they are adhering to these governance steps. And then finally, the social engineering around it. And maybe one last point around this is it's the ramifications I feel is broader than just the governance. It's also about democratizing this, right? Ganesh, one thing I think about a lot
Yeah.
is incentives are always economic, right? So people tend to incentivize towards economic prosperity versus access to all. Like that's generally how markets move. So how do you incentivize for social good, not just economic incentives, which is what is required when you think about countries having equal access, right? So that's another
Yeah.
ramification I think about a lot as well. But yeah, it's a multifaceted problem and requires a multifaceted answer as well. But thanks for sharing your thoughts on this, right? I know
Awesome.
we are way over time, so I'm going to wrap up here.
I'm,
But lovely conversation, Ganesh. I do want to hear your concluding thoughts before we close, though. Anything you would love to share to our audience today?
No, I mean, first off, you're doing a great job just, being a voice of reason and promoting I still feel there's a huge gap in educating and letting people know the
Mm,
right,
yeah,
what's real, what's not, and demystifying it.
yeah,
It's important because
yeah,
AI, as I said, is an all the more powerful technology and,
yeah,
set of tools. that in the development of which you want to have more diverse, more engaged
Mm,
voices from all walks of life. So, I
mm,
mean, like in my podcast, Stories in AI, your podcast that
yeah.
you're doing, and all the work you do on LinkedIn, getting that word out and getting more and more people engaged in the conversation is critical, right? If
Mm,
you're a,
mm,
so if you're in any walks of life, if you're a technologist, you're not a technologist, you're a knowledge worker, you're in anything, I think the big call to action is get yourself familiarized because
yeah.
we're seeing the future unfold in front of you, and things are
Yeah.
going to be very, very different in the next two
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
Resistance is futile, right? Resistance is futile.
Yeah.
So you have to
Mm,
really look at it and say, what does the what does this mean for me as an individual, for
yeah.
me as an employee, a corporation, a societal member,
Yeah.
and then build
Mm,
that. It's not Chat GPT, it's like UGPT. What's your
mm,
UGPT avatar out of this thing, right?
mm,
And
mm,
it could be learning more to, it could be, I mean, you don't, if you like, oh, I don't know how to code, well, it's not an excuse for building systems anymore,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't
Yeah.
know how to actually write good content to promote my business. Well,
Mm,
like, not an
mm,
excuse anymore. You can use this. So tools are available, the capabilities are there. Create your future self and imagine that,
yeah.
and try to see how the world, when it's going to shift and change so much, how can you leverage that to accelerate your personal and
Yeah.
professional growth? I think it's a huge opportunity for everyone.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. The person who is a self learner and the man in the arena, as they say, right, is probably the one who's going to stay ahead and relevant. Thanks, Ganesh. I think we covered a lot of ground here. Personally, I think I learned a lot, especially with respect to how will impact healthcare. I love your podcast, Stories in AI, as well. So I highly recommend folks to go check that out. And I hope you have a great rest of your trip back in India before you fly back home. Thanks a lot for your time, Ganesh. Lovely having you here today.
Well, thanks for having me, Ranjani. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.